West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
It's Henry Kissinger's 100th birthday. Yes, the man who served as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State to two Republican presidents, Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, the author of more than a dozen best-selling books on foreign policy and grand strategy, and a man who's been described as arguably the most famous and controversial diplomat of the 20th century, turns a century old on Saturday, May the 27th. In fact, this past Monday, Kissinger blew out the candles on his 100th birthday cake on the Economic Club of New York stage in front of an adoring audience. And remember, it's not just conservatives who worship at the altar of the Henry Kissinger. Establishment liberals, top Democrats even, have fallen over one another to associate themselves with the great Kissinger, to heap praise upon his ginormous intellect and historic achievements. Barack Obama's administration honored Kissinger with a special award. Hillary Clinton called him her friend and said she relied on his counsel. Samantha Power, the self-styled champion of humanitarian interventions, went to a baseball game with Kissinger. And Joe Biden, when he was a senator, toasted Kissinger, although to be fair, he hasn't yet invited him to the White House like all of his predecessors have done. But look, here's what I want to do to mark Kissinger's 100th birthday. I want to talk about some of the many, many people around the world who didn't get to live till 100 or even 60, 70 or 80 because of Henry Kissinger, because of his support for brutal dictators, brutal regimes, brutal wars and war crimes. Let's start where else? In Southeast Asia. The war in Vietnam, which Kissinger may have ridiculously won a Nobel Peace Prize for ending, but which he prolonged and escalated in the first place, including a secret and illegal expansion of that bloody war to Laos and Cambodia. It was him. Thanks to a report released by the Department of Defense in 1973, we know that the National Security Council, headed by Henry A. Kissinger, approved each of the 3,875 Cambodia bombing raids in 1969 and 1970, as well as the methods for keeping them out of the newspapers. To quote Kissinger himself while instructing an all-out air assault on Cambodia, anything that flies on anything that moves. As Human Rights Watch noted in 2001, United States and South Vietnamese aerial bombings on Kissinger's watch left approximately 350,000 Laotian civilians and 600,000 Cambodian civilians dead. And just this past week, The Intercept reported, on the basis of US military documents and eyewitness accounts from Cambodian survivors, that Kissinger is responsible for more civilian deaths in Cambodia than was previously known. And yet, Kissinger has never apologized for what he did to Laos or Cambodia, instead defending those bombing campaigns as legitimate attacks on North Vietnamese forces and saying he failed to see any moral issue with them. Still, as the late great Anthony Bourdain once wrote, witness what Henry did in Cambodia, the fruits of his genius for statesmanship, and you will never understand why he's not sitting in the dock at The Hague next to Milosevic. Then there's Argentina. In 1976, a coup d'etat overthrew the elected president and replaced Eva Perón with a military junta. That junta then launched what's been called the dirty war, the hunting down of political dissidents, of socialists, trade unionists, students. And they launched it with the approval, encouragement even, of Henry Kissinger. We know this thanks to declassified documents, which the New Yorker reported on, writing, 2 days after the coup, Kissinger was briefed by his Assistant Secretary of State, who warned him, I think also we've got to expect a fair amount of repression, probably a good deal of blood in Argentina before too long. Kissinger replied, whatever chance they have, they will need a little encouragement, because I do want to encourage them. In a meeting with the Argentine foreign minister 2 months later, Kissinger advised him, in the words of the New Yorker, winkingly, quote, we are aware you are in a difficult period. We understand you must establish authority. If there are things that have to be done, you should do them quickly. Somewhere between 20 and 30,000 people are believed to have been arrested, tortured, and killed in Argentina's dirty war. As The Guardian notes, many bodies have never been found. No birthday parties for them. Then there is East Timor, which was invaded by Indonesia in December 1975, an invasion that led to the death of at least 100,000 people over the next 2 decades plus of Indonesian occupation, according to a UN-backed Truth Commission. On the eve of that invasion, literally the day before, Kissinger, alongside President Ford, met with Indonesian dictator General Suharto and basically gave him the green light to invade. To quote Kissinger's advice to Suharto from a declassified document, it is important that whatever you do succeeds quickly, but that it would be better if it were done after we returned to the United States. Then there's East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, which was attacked by a military-ruled West Pakistan, now just Pakistan, in 1971, a conflict that killed hundreds of thousands of Bengalis and displaced millions. And yet, as Princeton professor Gary Bass has shown, based on declassified documents and White House tapes, Kissinger stood stoutly behind Pakistan's generals, supporting the murderous regime at many of the most crucial moments. And when a US diplomat on the ground in what was then East Pakistan sent a cable to Washington warning of a genocide, Kissinger called the man a maniac and had him dismissed from his post. I could go on and on and on, sadly. I didn't even get to Chile and Kissinger's support for General Pinochet's coup there, or his betrayal of Iraq's Kurds. Kissinger, of course, has for years denied any criminal culpability for any of this. But he did cancel a trip to South America in 2002 after Chile opened a probe into the Pinochet coup. As human rights lawyer Bruce Broomhall told the New York Times back then, quote, I think it's clear that Kissinger is now one of many, many officials who have to think twice before they travel. As historian Greg Grandin of Yale has argued, a full tally hasn't been done, but a back-of-the-envelope count would attribute 3, maybe 4 million deaths to Kissinger's actions. So where is the accountability? The reckoning? Where is justice, dare I ask? In his 2001 book, The Trial of Henry Kissinger, the late Christopher Hitchens called for Kissinger to be prosecuted for war crimes, for crimes against humanity, and for offences against common or customary or international law, including conspiracy to commit murder, kidnap, and torture. And yet Kissinger this week celebrates his landmark 100th birthday with not an arrest warrant or war crimes tribunal in sight. So, congratulations, Henry. Pat yourself on the back for living such a long life, and as a free man too. It's a shame so many millions of victims of your policies can't say the same.
Dansez maintenant sous l'été, les pieds nus dans le sable. Dansez maintenant et jetez vos ennuis dans les vagues qui dansent.
In the second most populous state in the country, Texas, there's this weird mismatch between the 30 million citizens and their political leadership. The government is just solid deep red. Republicans hold majorities in both houses of the legislature. They control every statewide office and the state Supreme Court, and it's been this way for nearly 30 years. But the citizens of Texas are nowhere near as homogenous. In fact, the state is trending towards the Democrats, to the left, shifting nearly 8 points towards Democrats in just the past decade. And we have seen some close races, famously that Senate race in 2018 when Beto O'Rourke came within 3 points of unseating Ted Cruz. But as of yet, that Democratic shift, and we've seen it at the presidential level, has not been big enough to change much of anything in Texas state politics. So, elected Republicans in that state have long faced essentially zero political accountability, and that generally, as a general matter, leads to widespread corruption and misconduct. Let's take Republican State Representative Brian Slayton. Remember that guy? So-called family values conservative led the charge on anti-LGBTQ legislation, describing drag performers as, quote, perverted adults. Well, an internal investigation just determined that 45-year-old Slayton had sex with his 19-year-old aide after getting her drunk. Now, to their credit, after a solemn, sometimes angry and tearful recounting of Slayton's graphic and offensive behavior, the Texas House voted to expel him 147-0, making him the first member of the Texas legislature to be removed from office in nearly a century. It just gives you some of the idea of some of the characters who make up the Republican caucus in the Texas state leg. It's quite a crew. Then you have the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, who was just reelected to a third term after attempting to overturn the 2020 election, suing the Biden administration over and over, joining the effort to ban abortion medication. In his 8 years in office, Paxton has faced multiple criminal investigations, including a 2015 indictment on felony securities fraud. In 2020, senior members of this guy's own office came forward alleging he committed bribery, abuse of office, and other potential crimes. The Department of Justice is investigating those claims. Then, some of those aides who came forward to blow the whistle were fired and subsequently filed a lawsuit alleging improper retaliation. Earlier this year, Paxton settled with the whistleblowers for $3.3 million, money he asked the legislature to give him out of taxpayer funds. And now, these two Republican-led branches of Texas government have a beef that is exploding out into the open. The House, particularly the Speaker Dade Phelan, does not want to give Paxton that money. So they launched an investigation into the Attorney General, accusing him of committing multiple crimes, including felonies at a hearing yesterday. Paxton immediately fired back, accusing Speaker Phelan of being drunk on the job and calling on him to resign. And again, to be fair to Paxton here, something did sound off the other day.
Mr. Campbell sent an amendment. The amendment is acceptable to the author. Is there objection to the opposite amendment? The chair has none. The amendment is adopted. The chair recognizes Mr. Johnson of Harris. Mr. Johnson of Harris to speak in opposition to the bill.
I don't know about that. Now, to top it all off, just hours after that hearing where investigators ordered Paxton to preserve documents and evidence related to the accusations against him, a literal dumpster fire broke out at his office. Paxton initially released this video referring to it as a case of arson. Today, he announced a suspect has been arrested with charged with criminal mischief, and a preliminary investigation concluded the fire was accidental. But it looks like the House has the upper hand. The investigating committee just formally recommended that Ken Paxton be impeached for his potential crimes. If the impeachment is successful, and one Democratic lawmaker says they do have enough votes, Paxton would be required to step down from his post temporarily while facing trial in the state Senate, which would mean maybe, finally, some accountability is coming for Ken Paxton and Texas Republicans.
What is at the core of this impeachment?
So, Alicia, this goes back 3 years to the fall of 2020. A number of Ken Paxton's top lieutenants, and I'm not talking about people down in his agency, I'm talking about people who sat at the right hand of Ken Paxton. They went to the FBI and said, we believe our boss, the Attorney General of Texas, is engaging in a number of crimes, including bribery and using his office. Their allegations centered on his relationship with a well-known Austin investor by the name of Nate Paul. And they believed that Ken Paxton was taking efforts to assist Nate Paul, who, by the way, also was under federal investigation at that time. And so that then led to not only an ongoing federal investigation, but it prompted those whistleblowers to bring a lawsuit against Ken Paxton. That lawsuit was tentatively settled earlier this year for $3.3 million. And when Ken Paxton asked Texas lawmakers to fund that settlement, they said, wait just a minute. And they opened their own investigation and brought forth those investigative findings earlier this week.
I want to play some sound from the proceedings today, something you actually flagged that Republican State Representative Charlie Guerin said. Take a listen, and then we'll talk on the other side.
And I would like to point out that several members of this House, while on the floor of this House doing the state business, received telephone calls from General Paxton personally, threatening them with political consequences in their next election.
So again, that is a Republican state representative saying from the podium, A.G. Paxton was phone banking members of his caucus on the floor to tell him there would be consequences.
That's exactly what he said. And by the way, he didn't just say it once. He said it more than once to the entire House floor publicly, because there were some back and forth discussion with Ken Paxton supporters saying, well, who exactly got phone calls and what exactly was said? But again, that Representative Charlie Guerin, who, by the way, is on the House investigating committee who brought forth these 20 articles of impeachment, repeated that contention, that assertion that, yes, members of the House were, in fact, getting those types of messages and phone calls from Ken Paxton himself.
Tony, I've only got about a minute left, but I guess sort of my big picture political question is what the fallout is in Texas, and given the role that Paxton has played in the National Republican Party, what the fallout is nationally.
I think that's an open question at this point. I mean, look, Ken Paxton was resoundingly reelected to a third term just a few months ago, back in November. And so Republican senators, who, by the way, will be the jury in this upcoming impeachment trial in that chamber, they are well aware of that sort of support that Ken Paxton still enjoys across our state here.
Les pieds nus dans le sable. Dansez maintenant et jetez vos ennuis dans les vagues qui dansent, balancent au gré du vent salé. Dansez maintenant tout l'été, aimez-vous.
For nearly a decade, it has been enshrined in Florida state law that every year 3 people are to be added to the Florida Civil Rights Hall of Fame to honor them for their contributions in the fight for justice and equality. The Commission on Human Relations recommends up to 10 people, from which the governor selects 3. Their names and portraits are hung in the entrance to the state capitol. But this hasn't happened since 2019, which just by chance was also Governor Ron DeSantis' first year in office. And last week, religious leaders and local officials gathered to ask why. According to one official with the commission, the reason for the holdup was COVID, which is weird, right? Considering the Florida governor's blatant opposition to every other pandemic safety measure. I mean, that was literally what built his brand. The commissioners say that they're still awaiting the governor's selection of nominees, which I wouldn't expect anytime soon, considering his current priorities include announcing his presidential run during a convo with Twitter's chief troll and CEO Elon Musk. Now, I know it may be surprising since he doesn't allow it to be taught in Florida schools, but Ron DeSantis was actually a history teacher back in the day in Georgia. I mean, one of his students said that he taught the Civil War in a way that seemed like an attempt to justify slavery, but he did teach it. And believe it or not, he's also written a history book. Back in 2011, before his political career took off, DeSantis penned Dreams from Our Founding Fathers, First Principles in the Age of Obama. The book has since been almost completely scrubbed from the internet. There is currently literally one copy available on Amazon for just under $2,000. But according to the Washington Post's Gillian Brockwell, who was able to obtain a digital copy before it, poof, disappeared, the book is exactly what you'd expect from Ron DeSantis. An ahistorical mess, best summarized as Founders good, Obama bad. Joining me now is Gillian Brockwell, staff writer for the Washington Post history blog, Retropolis. What a great name. And I enjoyed your article, Gillian, more than a lot of stuff I've read recently. It was a lot of fun. Please explain to me this very hard to find book that apparently the publisher pulled off of their online roster.
Yeah, I actually don't know what happened with the book because the publisher won't call me back. I emailed and called, and they haven't told me exactly why it disappeared. But I do know that I bought it last summer thinking, oh, this might be fun. I cover history on my beat. His profile was, rising. So I purchased it. And then when it was clear he was going to run for president, I read it, which I'm glad you enjoyed reading my article. It was it was not very fun reading the book, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. And sometime before he released his campaign book that's not a campaign book this winter, the book disappeared. His first book disappeared from the internet.
Poof. It's not The Courage to Be Free, but, So this is one of my favorite stories in your book. And this is what you wrote. DeSantis quotes James Madison at Virginia's 1829 Constitutional Convention, saying he advised the delegates that these natural rights cannot be separated. The personal right to acquire property, which is a natural right, gives to property when acquired a right to protection, a social right. But he left out the part that the property he meant was people. The property he meant was people, slaves.
I mean, it was 2 paragraphs later in the speech that he quotes from that Madison makes it very plain that he is talking about enslaved African Americans, and he's saying that in this state constitutional convention that he doesn't want white men who don't own property to be able to vote because they could tax slavery into, being unprofitable for him and other enslavers. DeSantis is using that quote in his book to say that, the founders would have hated the individual mandate in the Affordable Care Act. That's not what Madison was talking about.
The only 2 black people that seem to appear in his book are Obama, who bad, Obama bad, and also Dr. King, who gets the usual same quote that all the Republicans use. Talk a little bit about this footnote from I Have a Dream, where he got it.
So, I think it's a pretty standard thing to give sort of milquetoast quotes from King so that, of course, everyone does it once a year on their Twitter, which Bernice King is always saying, this is not what my father supported, et cetera. Anyway, so he used this brief quote about from King in the I Have a Dream speech, saying that the Constitution was magnificent words and that it was a promissory note to future Americans. And, I have to say, most politicians who write about history are not using footnotes, do not have coherent arguments, are, terrible. And he had footnotes, and his arguments were coherent, even if they were completely taken out of context and, cherry picking and ahistorical. So there's that. Anyway, his footnote for King is the Yale Book of Quotations. It's not the I Have a Dream speech where it came from. And I don't mean to diss books of quotations. I think they're great. They're wonderful for what they are. That's not doing history. Books of quotations is not doing history.
And what Dr. King was trying to say is that the beautiful words in the Constitution are not being applied to black people. Right. He leaves all that out. My last question here, slavery is something he has really seemed to try to justify. Does he do that in the book as well?
Yeah, so in the intro, he kind of confronts slavery head on because you have to if you're talking about the founding fathers. But it's just for a couple paragraphs to say, and this is why I'm not going to mention slavery in the rest of the book, and, his justifications, he calls it a personal flaw of some of the founders.
Personal flaw.
Which is maybe a little bit of minimizing. I'll leave that to anyone's interpretation. But he also says, this is a common thing that I hear a lot, is that slavery was happening throughout human history. And, it's this variation on this argument of people didn't know it was wrong back then.
They didn't know.
Which, first of all, isn't true. Plenty of people did, the enslaved people themselves being the most important.
And abolitionists.
And then, yes. And then the last thing is that the enslaved people themselves are the most important people to have said, that it's wrong. This was wrong.
And the fact that you point out, as you point out in your article, a congenital slavery based on race, that was invented here in America. That was not going on anywhere else on earth ever, just here. And his buddy Madison was one of the people profiting from it. Gillian Brackell, thank you very much.
President Biden has reached an important milestone in shaping the federal judiciary. He's appointed 129 federal judges. According to the White House, that's more than former presidents Donald Trump, Barack Obama, and George W. Bush had at this point in their tenure. And among them, 13 black women confirmed as circuit court judges, more than all other presidents combined. And of course, he nominated the first black woman ever confirmed to the Supreme Court, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. But beyond the high court, President Biden's appointments could have a lasting impact on the ideological tilt of the federal judiciary. Joining me now to discuss this, Janae Nelson, President and Director Counsel of the Legal Defense Fund. Janae, welcome back to the Saturday Show. Thank you for being here. Beyond the significance of the number, why should it matter to Americans that President Biden has this record of judicial appointments?
Well, because our federal judiciary has long been very unrepresentative of the people in our democracy, and our courts are so integral to our system of justice that we need to see ourselves reflected in them. We need to see the rich diversity of this nation on the federal judiciary. We also want to see professional diversity in the federal judiciary. Right now, it is stacked with prosecutors, with corporate business people. And what we want to see in this moment where our civil rights are being tested, where our civil rights are on the chopping block, is to have people who have a rich history of different experiences interpret the laws that will affect everyday Americans and future generations to come. And President Biden's record has just been outstanding in terms of diversifying the judiciary and making up for frankly, centuries of discrimination that have prevented people from joining the judiciary and representing our democracy in a way that shows the rich, diverse, racial, ethnic, gender, ability, and professional diversity that our nation can deliver.
And the significance of these record judicial appointments throughout the federal judiciary is because that's the field team for the Supreme Court. And so if you've got this rich, diverse judiciary, that makes it possible for the Supreme Court to even more look like America. So, Janae, the LDF recently heralded the confirmation of the first black woman to the 11th Circuit, Nancy Abudu. Why is her appointment so significant?
Her appointment is historic. Nancy Abudu is a civil rights lawyer. She specializes in election law, but civil rights more broadly. She's brilliant. She's a dedicated public servant who has spent her career devoted to public interest law. And she will be the first Black woman on the 11th Circuit. And we're talking about Florida, Alabama, Georgia, that covers states that have very robust Black populations who've never had a Black woman be the arbiter of the very complex federal issues that come before that circuit court. So we're thrilled that we've finally broken through this historic record, but it's long overdue. We're in 2023, and the idea that we are heralding milestones of the first Black woman being on a circuit court is frankly disturbing. So we're very grateful that President Biden advanced this nominee and that the Senate confirmed her. And I very much look forward to the influence she will have on that circuit court.
So today, let's switch gears and talk about police reform, which is a key issue for the LDF. In the 3 years since the murder of George Floyd, where are we on police reform?
You know, it's a mixed bag, Jonathan. We are in a better place in terms of our language about public safety, in terms of our recognition that law enforcement is not the answer to every problem that we face as people in a very complex society, but we have not moved the needle enough, not at all, especially if you consider the uprisings that were not only multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational across this country, but around the world. I met earlier this week with representatives of the Canadian Parliament, Black representatives, and we talked about the influence that the George Floyd murder had on Black people around the globe in the diaspora, and the fact that there are new conversations happening across the world about the role of law enforcement, the militarization of law enforcement, the excessive force that Black people experience in any country that they exist in for the most part. And so we think that this moment is not over. The movement has not stopped. We certainly are pressing forward with reforms. We've issued a framework for public safety that we've been sharing with lawmakers and decision makers and frankly, anyone who's interested in thinking about how we can actually make our society safer, not add more resources to a broken system, but to actually rely on data-driven solutions to public safety. And it begins with rethinking and reimagining the system that has failed so many of us.
So, Janae, I just want to point out that the blueprint for public safety that you're talking about, it focuses on unarmed civilian responders, restorative justice programs, and increasing investment in community resources. Is this report available online?
Yes, it's a framework, and we are developing toolkits to support each pillar of that framework. And so you pointed out that one of the anchors of this is to make sure that you have the right responder for the circumstances in which you may find yourself. So if you are having a mental health crisis, you want the right responder to show up. If you are a young child calling to get help for your mother, like a Darian Murray, you want the right responder who can de-escalate a domestic violence circumstance and not see you come out of a room with your hands up and shoot you because we continue to adultify Black children and see Black people generally as potential criminal suspects automatically.
And you're talking about that young 11-year-old in Mississippi who was shot in the chest by police after calling 911 for help.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Friends and Family Fast Style. Fast and Furious 10, which has been dubbed Fast X, comes to us some 22 years after the first one and finds the formula intact. Vin Diesel's Dominic Toro and his multi-ethnic band of street-fighting motorheads and bikers get an enemy to fight, and the rest sort of just happens. How many of the details of their familial and other relationships or previous adventures you need to remember to follow along here is a question, just as it is with many franchises. The antagonist here, Dante Reyes, is drawn from FNF 5 and is the son of the bad guy the crew took out in that one. Played by Jason Momoa, his character is one of the bright spots here. Of course, he's the epitome of evil, but he's also a hilarious mashup of the Joker and Liberace, a foppish sociopath dressed in pastels who giggles as he kills. And no look at this one would be complete without mentioning the vehicles, along with staples like Dom's 1970 Dodge Charger RT, the fan-beloved orange and black special edition Mazda RX-7 from Tokyo Drift. Here, for the first time in a movie like this, we get a look at all-electric muscle cars, including a Dodge 2024 Charger Daytona and a DeLorean Alpha 5. And then, of course, there are the motorcycles. Is Tom's family first routine getting cliched? Sure. Do the stunts conform with the laws of physics? Not so much. Are some of the sidebars there just to continue the sagas of previous characters, thus contributing to its 160-minute running time? Probably, but the huge ensemble cast is having a great time, and you will too, as Fast X Part 1 rocks right up to its cliffhanger end, where you'll be perched till 2025's next installment. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, and welcome to Your Health Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
On this show, we highlight the latest vital health news, discoveries that affect your body and your mind. Every episode, we dive into one topic. We discuss diseases, treatments, and some controversies.
And we demystify the medical research and ways you can use to stay healthy. I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
We're Scientific American's senior health editors. On today's show, the official COVID public health emergency ended this month. What will that mean to you? Will it change how you get vaccines, tests, and treatments? Will it change how much you pay for them? And how will you hear warnings about new COVID waves?
The COVID pandemic isn't over, but many of the official emergencies are. A few weeks ago, the U.S. government ended its public health emergency, which has been in place since early 2020. And the World Health Organization announced the disease, quote, no longer constitutes a public health emergency of international concern.
It's important to keep in mind that the virus still poses a threat. In the middle of May, about 4,000 people per day were being hospitalized with COVID in the U.S., and more than 800 were dying each week. But the end of the U.S. public health emergency indicates those numbers have dropped a lot from the time when thousands died every day. And those counts continued to go down. Tentatively, I'd say we're trending in the right direction.
I was wondering, though, if the U.S. declaration is going to change everyone's access to things that people still need. Take vaccines and COVID tests. For years, the vaccines have been free, and so have most rapid home tests. The emergency let the government set rules on prices and insurance coverage. I don't know if that's going to change now. Fortunately, we do know someone who can tell us.
Indeed. Our colleague, Lauren Young, SciAm's associate health editor, just wrote a story on this exact subject. So we asked her to come on the show and bring everyone up to speed. Hi, Lauren.
Hey, Tanya. Hey, Josh.
Welcome to Your Health Quickly. It's great to have you here.
It's really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, jumping right in, can you tell us what ending the public health emergency is going to do to COVID health treatments? What's going to happen to vaccines to start with?
Right. So those shots are a really big deal. COVID vaccines absolutely improved people's protection against the virus and changed the course of the pandemic. Ever since they were made available in 2021, they have been completely free for everyone who wanted one, regardless of whether you had insurance or the type of insurance you had. This is because the federal government has purchased nearly 2 billion doses of COVID vaccines and 171 million bivalent boosters. Those are the ones that are formulated to cover Omicron strains. So healthcare providers can't deny any eligible person a vaccine or booster purchased on the government's dime, and they can't charge you any out-of-pocket costs.
That's great news. So there's a stockpile, essentially. But what happens when that runs out?
Well, if the government decides not to replenish it, then any cost you may have to pay will depend on your insurance. People on most private insurances and certain Medicare programs should still be able to receive vaccines from in-network providers with no out-of-pocket costs. Medicaid members will have their vaccines covered without copays through September 30th, 2024. That's also true for any future boosters recommended by the CDC.
Say I didn't have insurance. What might I have to pay?
Right. Well, so Pfizer and Moderna, two of the major vaccine developers, have hinted that commercial prices would be between $110 and $130 per dose. That's about 3 to 4 times higher than the discounted rate the government paid per dose. There is some good news, though, for people without insurance. The Health and Human Services Department announced a $1.1 billion program to continue to provide COVID vaccines, along with certain antiviral treatments like Paxlovid, to people who don't have insurance. That money is expected to last through December 2024.
Okay, now I have private insurance, a group plan through Siam. You think I won't have to pay anything if there's, say, a new fall booster shot? Not even those $20 copays I sometimes have to fork over for prescriptions?
Right. So I had the same exact question because I'm on that same plan. So we won't have to pay anything, even copays, for the vaccine or future boosters, as long as we get them from an in-network provider. COVID vaccines will likely transition to a seasonal program, so coverage would be similar to your typical flu vaccine. The experts I spoke to suspect many other private insurance companies are going to do the same thing.
Is the same thing true for treatments like Paxlovid?
Pretty much. So the government also stocked up on these drugs and medications, which will continue to be free for people no matter what your insurance status is. But again, once those supplies run out, your insurance will have to cover the price.
I've heard that many private health insurers have already stopped covering all of the out-of-pocket costs for COVID hospital visits and treatments. They're basically treating COVID like any other disease.
Yeah, that's totally right. But people on government insurance programs with drug coverage, like Medicare or Medicaid, they won't have to pay anything for a while. Medicare will be free indefinitely, while Medicaid will make treatments free until September 30th, 2024. And then coverage will be determined by state.
Let's talk about COVID tests. I've been getting free at-home antigen tests from the government through the mail. I also got free ones from my local library, and my insurance plan paid for some that I picked up at the drugstore. But now all of that's changing. Private insurance companies are no longer required to cover at-home tests and lab tests.
Yeah, so it's really up to your insurance plan. They decide whether costs will continue to be covered completely or if you'll have to pay any or all of the fees. COVID tests will likely be treated similarly to other screening tests like your blood sugar or your cholesterol tests.
If you're uninsured, you've probably been paying for COVID tests out of pocket already, even before the public health emergency ended.
Yeah, that started in the middle of last year when a lot of the COVID relief funds and reimbursement programs began to end.
So my understanding is that Medicaid is different because each state has its own program. Those programs should cover tests without charge until September 30th, 2024, and then after that, it'll depend on what states decide. For Medicare recipients, if your doctor or healthcare provider orders a COVID PCR test, that will still be covered. At-home tests, though, are a different story.
They are. So for a home test, Medicare members will have to pay like people with private insurance. I did some price checking. At most drugstores and retailers, at-home testing kits range between $10 and $40.
So my insurance won't pay for any of that?
Yeah, that's right. In general, you can probably expect to spend more out of pocket on these tests than you did before.
I have a bunch of tests at home, but a couple are close to the expiration date on the package.
You know, they actually might still be good. The FDA has extended the shelf life on many tests after finding out that they retain their accuracy for longer periods. You can check for new dates on the FDA website. You just have to search for COVID-19 diagnostic tests.
One other thing I've been very interested in as the emergency ends is how we're going to track COVID levels. The CDC has been emphasizing your level of community exposure as a way to figure out how careful to be. If there was a peak in cases or a certain level of hospitalizations, consider wearing a high-quality mask in crowded indoor spaces and stuff like that. But the CDC is changing what it reports now, right? It won't ask local health departments to report positive test rates, transmission levels, and total cases.
That's right. The CDC has been one of the major sources of COVID case data, but it's now going to lean on COVID death rates, emergency room data, and hospital admissions for its primary national surveillance measurements. This is partly because some of the data for case rates were sort of unreliable. They became questionable when people began using more widely available at-home COVID tests. The CDC says weekly COVID hospitalization rates are better indicators of local outbreaks at this point.
Okay, so where can people find those local hospitalization numbers?
Local city and state public health departments have this information. You can also find hospitalizations by county and state on the CDC's COVID data tracker.
And there's another place to search for outbreak warnings, the sewer. Epidemiologist Caitlin Jedalina recently suggested in her newsletter that people follow local and regional wastewater trends, and that data will still be coming in. Wastewater analysis is a really strong tool for identifying and tracking variants and monitoring transmission.
It's a really good idea. Wastewater numbers measure the amount of the COVID-causing virus found in sewage, which is a pretty good proxy for the number of infected people. So if numbers are going up in your area, you should probably start taking precautions like masking.
Yeah, I think that's pretty sound advice. You can find COVID wastewater surveillance data on the CDC's data tracker.
That's really good to know. In fact, all in all, I feel like I know a lot more than I did 10 minutes ago.
Me too. And if you want even more info, check out Lauren's story online at SciAm.com. Great talking with you, Lauren.
Thanks so much for having me.
Your Health Quickly is produced by Talika Bose, Jeff Delvicio, and Kelso Harper. It's edited by Ella Feder and Alexa Lim. Our music is composed by Dominic Smith.
Our show is part of Scientific American's podcast, Science Quickly. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you like the show, give us a rating or review. And if you have ideas for topics we should cover, send us an email at yourhealthquickly@sciam.com. That's yourhealthquickly@sciam.com.
And don't forget to go to SciAm.com for updated and in-depth health news.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
We'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Danger, danger, go back, go back. Books ahead.
Listen up. This matters. I'm Louis Black, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Escambia County, Florida, has been sued for banning books in its school libraries. Among the books, Tango Makes Three, the award-winning children's book, a true story about a penguin family in the Central Park Zoo with two fathers, a situation apparently not a biggie in the penguin world. So far, the school committee has removed 10 books, including Tango, contrary to the recommendation of the expert review committee, which said keep the books on the shelves. But the school committee didn't, and in fact, changed the policy about what happens to books that have been approved that are being challenged. A challenge book used to stay put during the review process. Now, books being challenged are indefinitely quarantined in a restricted area in the school library that children cannot enter without prior parental permission, an obvious disincentive that raises a kind of penguin and the egg problem. How can kids check out a book or ask for parental permission if they can't hold it in their hands and look at it? As Suzanne Nossel, the CEO of PEN America, one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, said, this school district offers a vivid and disturbing example of what's happening across the country with politically motivated, ideologically driven, viewpoint-based bans on books.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union because freedom can't defend itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day 15 women lost their jobs for dancing on their lunch break. The women worked for the Curtis Publishing Company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The company was a powerhouse in the flourishing magazine industry. Curtis published the Saturday Evening Post, which featured popular cover art by Norman Rockwell. Curtis also published the Ladies' Home Journal. It became the first magazine to have 1 million subscribers. This magazine had the widest circulation of a group of periodicals known as the Seven Sisters. The Sisters targeted a middle-class women's audience and included titles such as McCall's, Women's Day, and Good Housekeeping. The magazines featured stories on homemaking, including how-to articles and advice columns. Edward W. Bach was the editor of the Ladies' Home Journal. He heard that 15 of his employees had been dancing the turkey trot on their lunch break. This did not fit into the magazine's idea for the proper behavior of women. The Vatican had condemned the ragtime dance as too suggestive. Some dance halls banned the step, but the censorship only served to make it more popular with young people. When Bach found out about the dancing, he fired all 15 women. The magazine went on to rail against future dance crazes. In 1921, an article declared, "The road to hell is often paved with jazz steps." Have you ever danced on the job? What do you think your employer would say if you took time to turkey trot while enjoying your turkey sandwich? Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Joining me now is the cartoonist, the editor, and the author, Art Spiegelman. He wrote and illustrated the Pulitzer Prize-winning graphic novel Mouse, which is today's Velshi Banned Book Club feature. Art, good to see you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Ali.
Art, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, texted this to me. He said, imagine, it's incredible that a man who is the child of Holocaust survivors finds himself in 2023 speaking about the banning of his own book about the atrocities of the Holocaust, and the fact that it's cartoon illustrations at that. I mean, the irony of that, it's not ironic, it's horrible, but I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's why I'm here with you today, because I never really meant for my book to be made for young people, especially. It was made, insofar as it was educational, it was to teach me how come I'm on the planet when my parents were supposed to have been killed way before they conceived me. And the fact that it has an afterlife as a book in schools is interesting. I had to get used to it. And the fact that a lot of graphic novels have been aimed at young adult readers is a surprise to me. But I felt that the tendencies brought up by this frantic need to control children's thoughts in ways that seem reprehensible to me and are indeed, as you were saying, an echo of the book burnings of the 1930s in Germany is kind of unfortunate.
In Volume 2 of Mouse, you depict yourself inundated with interview questions and media opportunities, ironically. From the book on page 202, it reads, "Tell our viewers what message you want them to get from your book." A message? I never thought of reducing it to a message. I wasn't trying to convince anybody of anything, end quote. And again, here you are now on a news show after a year of pretty constant interviews defending, I don't want to use defending Mouse because he's not defending it, but having to discuss the banning of Mouse or people who don't want people to read it. Let's talk more about that. That you are now the story about the story.
Yeah, and I've taken great pains to expand it from Mouse to talk about all the other book banning that's going on, because I've been kind of puzzled by the focus on Mouse, in that, in general, yeah, there is an uptick in anti-Semitism in America. It's always been a backbeat. But I think that the main victims of the current book banning are people who've done things about race and about gender at the moment. And Mouse has survived this particular banning with flying colors, with my book resurfaced on all these bestseller lists, as I think you mentioned in an intro here. And on the other hand, I think I've been trying to figure out why Mouse? Why was Mouse selected as the focus of all this? And it backfired terribly for the McMinn County authoritarians. But I think the reason is because the book, although it's in granular detail, the story of my parents and the story of my father's and my relationship in the wake of the disasters, but I think it has to do with something in the DNA of Mouse, which is it started out as something for an underground comic book called Funny Animals. And for that, I was just trying to find something that I could use anthropomorphic characters for. And it started out when I was in a film class taught by a friend of mine, Ken Jacobs, showing racist animated cartoons from the 1930s, which It's a very effective racist set of caricatures for all minorities, including Jews, actually. But then showing an early sound Mickey Mouse and saying, look at Mickey Mouse. He's Al Jolson with big round ears on the top. It's the same as these racist caricatures because Mickey Mouse was once a Jazz Age figure. And he wasn't the corporate mouse logo that appears at Disney World, currently having its battles with one of the aforementioned authoritarians, DeSantis. But I think that because I use these animal figures, and it happened to be like after I realized I'm not going to do something about the Ku Klux cats and mice as a metaphor, because I just didn't know enough about it and it could come off as just genuinely racist, even though it wouldn't be intended that way. I realized I had a metaphor closer to home, the idea that Jews were considered vermin by the Nazis, an inferior race. And that DNA is in there. So in a way, I think Mouse is still about all othering, with this very, very granular, specific details of the othering that decimated my family.
I've got a copy here of something called Switchyard. This is the University of Tulsa semi-annual literary publication. It's called Tennessee Waltz, and there's a picture on the front here shows a Nazi cat and a Jewish mouse. In what ways was this illustration inspired by Mouse's banning in Tennessee?
Probably entirely, but the whole way that picture was made is it's in a cycle of things I've been doing to try to get my hand back after spending a year feeling like I was running for office. I was on webinars and lectures and news interviews of one kind and another for the whole year. It left me punchy, and by the end, I was barely drawing anymore. So I invented something that I call pareidolias. It's the word for when you project something onto an electric socket so it looks like eyes and a mouth, or when you're looking at clouds and seeing things. So I started doing things where I was making blots in color with my watercolors on a sheet of paper, and then turning it around to find images in it. So, for example, I think I pulled one out to show you quickly because I had a Xerox of the blot before and after. This was the blot, and then I tried to find a picture in it, so it became like a homemade Rorschach test. This was the final result. And you turn it, I think, that way or that. Yeah, I think that way. Yes, it became this when I filled in the imagery. And the one on the cover of Switchyards was made the same way. It was made by making a bunch of blots. But that particular ink blot was the first time I did anything that wasn't just totally private in my notebook. I was just making the blots because a local nonprofit art gallery called the Drawing Center asked if I would contribute a drawing for their annual auction to help raise money. And I figured, okay, but I should find a blot where I can at least have a mouse face, because then people will be more interested in bidding on it, since Mouse seems to be the skyscraper among the bungalow colony of the other works I've made. So I figured I would do that, but I didn't know what I was going to do with it. So I just did my usual of just following the thoughts around. And once I had the mouse face there, I was just letting my id run around it, and it turned into a cat scratching a mouse with Klanspeople and burnings and spiked shoes, a Klansman with Uncle Sam striped pants underneath. And so that was just letting myself run loose. It's not the opinion for public consumption, let's say. It was just me figuring out what the hell I was going through at that moment, with my face getting scratched by an angry wild cat in the arms of a Klansman. And so it wasn't really made as a public statement, and it doesn't cover my full range of feelings about what was going on, because I feel like I was scratched, but other people were poleaxed, beheaded, and badly pushed around in ways that hadn't quite been my personal experience.
Art, great to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. Art Spiegelman, author and illustrator of today's Velshi Band Book Club feature, Mouse.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dents quand elle était hier, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.